Good day, everyone. This is Ali Pabrai with ecfirst. Very excited to be here with you and excited to partner with searchhealthit.com for this podcast today. The topic today is checklist for high-tech and state mandates for breach management. I wanted to share with you some of the latest findings related to the cost of data breaches to the industry. The Ponemon Institute reports that data breaches cost hospitals about $6 billion a year, and that patient privacy is in fact in jeopardy, that hospitals are not protecting patient data appropriately, that the healthcare industry as a whole is lagging behind implementation and compliance with the high-tech mandates related to breach notification. If we look at the OCR report that was published recently on the OCR website related to breach notification, we see that most of the breaches are caused by theft of laptops, theft of portable devices, theft of even network servers, as an organization in Texas had experienced. Data breaches have in fact reached new heights. The average cost of a healthcare breach is over $280 for each record. And that cost is not insignificant. As I said at the start of the podcast, that the impact of a data breach over a 2-year period is about $2 million per organization. And it does, in fact, have a lifetime value of a lost patient, which is a little over $100,000. All of that statistic, if you will, comes from the Ponemon Institute, and that the average organization had 2.4 data breach incidents over the past 2 years. A lot of data breaches still go by undetected. So a question that you have to ask your organization is, how prepared is your organization to discover these breaches on a timely basis? As you know, the high-tech data breach notification mandate, as well as state regulations related to breach notification, require organizations to discover and report on a timely basis. That window, if you will, that organizations have to work with is 60 days, maximum of 60 days, 60 calendar days, as per the High-Tech Data Breach Notification Act. And state regulations actually are much stricter. California, for example, as well as other states, that period is 5 days. It is important that organizations be intimately familiar with the requirements tied into breach notification. And I think the best place to start is to take a look at the breach notification form published by OCR on their website. This breach notification form has several important sections which must be reported if, in the case of high-tech, more than 500 patients or individuals are impacted. And as you look to put in place a checklist for managing data breaches, I think it's important to pay close attention to this breach notification form. For example, in the breach notification form, it specifically requires an organization to identify the date of the breach and the date of the discovery of the breach. And it is critical that organizations pay close attention to those two dates, and a good process for breach and incident management will result in those two dates being as close as possible. So the date of the breach, that's when the breach actually occurred, versus the date of the discovery of the breach should be as close as possible. It gives confidence to the organization that it is, in fact, implementing controls and capabilities to detect breaches on a timely basis. Further, in that same OCR breach notification form, organizations need to report on the type of breach that they may have experienced, whether that's a theft or a loss, improper disposal. I think as we look at 2011, we are going to see a rise in unauthorized breaches, unauthorized access to information. May happen by employees, may happen by clinicians, your physicians, your nurses, for example. And that's why it is so very important that all the applications that come into contact with patient information, protected health information, PHI, must have robust audit capabilities implemented so that you can always go back when you are completing the analysis for a breach to tie an action back to an individual user. And I just know from personal experience, many organizations struggle with that. It is critical for organizations to take a close look at the types of generic accounts that may exist within the organization. Also, another change that will rise in 2011 is the broad area of mobile computing and the impact of mobile computing platforms like the iPad, for example, like your iPhones, the BlackBerry-type devices, smartphones, and the like. These obviously also come into contact with protected health information. These devices may be lost. These devices may be stolen. Breaches could directly occur as a consequence of those actions. And then what exactly is the organization doing to appropriately protect it? So obviously in the case of mobile computing, two areas of information security become absolutely critical for organizations to address within the scope of policies defined for mobile computing and for breach notification. And those two areas are strong authentication to ensure that the appropriate individual only has access to that mobile computing platform, and the second area being strong encryption. All encryption solutions are not equal, so you want to make sure that you've got robust encryption capabilities on that mobile computing platform. Federal agencies also expect you to describe the breach in terms of location. How did that breach occur? What was the type of breach, the type of media, the type of protected health information? So your policies and procedures must be detailed enough to enable you to identify that all of those areas that information is required for in case you suffered a breach. Further, the types of security controls that you have in place before a breach occurs versus the type of security controls that you have in place after a breach are also requirements that need to be documented in the breach notification form. So some terrific information, if you will, insight that you can gain from the OCR breach notification form that should help you to articulate your organization's policies and procedures appropriately. I am a firm believer in a checklist-driven solution in specific areas where it does make sense. I think in the case of breach notification, this is a terrific area where organizations should be looking at some type of a HIPAA and HITECH compliance checklist. Obviously, the motivation for the same is to enable a resilient, robust security program, vibrant, dynamic to the types of threats that protected health information may be subject to vulnerabilities to that PHI inside your organization. And there are 7 critical steps that organizations should be reviewing on a consistent basis as a part of that checklist. The first one being security responsibility is to clearly identify the individual as well as the team and to document the name of the individual on organizational charts so that all employees, all members of the workforce are aware of who is the individual that needs to be communicated with if the organization suffers some type of an incident or a breach. So clearly identifying, clearly documenting, clearly establishing the role, responsibilities of that position are absolutely critical. Given the statistics that I shared with you at the start of this podcast, breach is an executive level issue. Many organizations require the information security officer to report to executive management, the audit committee of the board of directors as well, on a periodic basis about the readiness of the organization in discovering and managing breaches. So that's very important. That's step 1 in your checklist. Step 2 is to conduct a comprehensive risk analysis activity. The HIPAA security rule requires it. It's the number 1 implementation specification. Many of you that are on this podcast are being driven to reach compliance with meaningful use requirements for electronic health records tied into the HITECH Act that go into effect January of 2011. And one of the core objectives in stage 1 for meaningful use is directly tied into risk analysis. So it is critical that organizations conduct that on a regular basis. And what the law requires, what HIPAA and HITECH require, is not just that an organization conducts a comprehensive and thorough risk analysis, but also addresses the deficiencies both for compliance and security gaps that have been identified on a timely basis. Step 3 of the checklist is to update your policies, to update your procedures. Step 4 is your corrective action plan, also referred to as CAP, C-A-P, to ensure that you are, in fact, implementing the controls and that those controls, security controls, are working as intended in your organization. Step 5 is about the security of your third parties, because remember, you may be a covered entity, you may be a provider that is working with business associates. These business associates could be in the U.S. or could be outside the U.S. It is your responsibility to ensure that these business associates are as secure in managing your protected health information, your patient information. And so that's where the security of the third parties becomes important, and a thorough review of the business associate contract, BAC, or the business associate agreement, BAA, is critical. Step 6 is to ensure training related to HIPAA, HITECH regulation to all employees of the organization. And Step 7 is to conduct an audit and evaluation on a regular schedule. And from a best practice perspective, I would highly encourage organizations to budget resources, to budget time, to conduct this on an annual cycle. So again, this is Ali Pabrai with ecfirst. Very excited to be here with Search healthit.com. And as I look to bring this podcast to a close, I wanted to really spend a couple of minutes emphasizing a specific checklist that we have developed targeted to the area of breach notification that can enable your organization to address federal and state mandates. So it comes down to 5 items in this specific checklist for breach notification. Number 1 being to develop a policy on discovery. So you need to discover this breach, obviously, on a timely basis. Reporting, because you would need to report potentially to the patient, to media, to federal or state authorities, and then notification of information breaches. So that's the first step, to develop your policy. Tied into those policy to that policy would be steps 2 and 3, which would be to review, update, and integrate security controls and reporting capabilities for incident management. You want to make sure that you've got the appropriate technology in place to allow you to discover these breaches, and in fact, the development of procedure for information breach management, which is step 3, and for information breach notification, which is step 4. And then step 5 would be to conduct training for all members of the workforce. So 5 very important steps as you look at your checklist to see how well prepared is your organization in addressing breaches. I would highly recommend, as you go back and take a look at your policy documents, as you take a look at your procedures, to not limit the scope of those policies and associated procedures to protected health information, or PHI, but in fact to go beyond PHI and look at all personally identifiable information, PII, personally identifiable information, PII. So as you look to update your policies for 2011, specifically in the area of breach and incident management, which, as I mentioned earlier, does in fact introduce a significant risk to your organization, you want to make sure that your policies are updated and targeted at personally identifiable information, that the associated procedures for breach management and for breach notification, so you need to have at least 2 procedures tied in specifically to the area of breach management and notification, and that you have in fact implemented the appropriate controls, those controls are working as intended, and that your employees, your members of the workforce, have in fact been trained. So again, very appreciative of the time and the opportunity that I, Ali Pabrai, had to share with you today, and I look forward to similar presentations in the future. Thanks again. Have a great day.